This is a little story about the worst guitar purchase I would say I've ever made, and how it kind of led me to this. And looking back. And looking back on it, I'm thinking about the year 2015. That was 10 years ago. Why I didn't buy one of these then. I was playing in a duo called Benson and Lineweber. And even back then, since we were always playing with two acoustic guitars, I was always looking for some kind of a solution, that kind of a one-size-fits-all type guitar. So I was always kind of looking for something where I could play the most acoustic of acoustic songs and then flip right over to playing, like Hendrix or something at 10:30 or 11, or Leonard Skinner or whatever, and do it right, rock out. So one day I went into Guitar Center. This would be about 2015. And I had enough money to buy a pretty nice guitar. I had, over, I think over $2,000, a bunch of $100 bills in my pocket. And, it was mostly playing money or whatever. And then, maybe a little bit extra I kicked in. And I was kind of explaining to the guy what I wanted. And he said, "Oh, you got to try this great new guitar out. It's a Taylor. It's kind of like an acoustic, but it's also kind of like an electric. It's a hybrid guitar." I said, "Man, what is that? That sounds great." And so he brought out this Taylor T5z, and he was telling me how great it would be. The thing at the time had like tens on it, so it was really light. I mean, you played it the way it was set up in the store. It was played. Because I'm an acoustic picker. I need something to kind of dig in and pick. But it kind of played like an electric. It was kind of a weird looking guitar. It was maybe one of the most beautiful guitars I've ever owned. I don't know. I've got some beautiful guitars now. It's just in terms of beauty, a Gibson's hard to beat. But really beautiful. And he went on, and you can play this like an acoustic, and then turn around and play it like an electric. And so I forked over, and I'm pretty sure it was $3,100. Now I looked, those Taylor T5Zs, the upper one is $3,800, and I think that 10 years later that might be the one I bought, because I think I bought the premier one. It was Koa. They did have, at the time I didn't even know they have some less expensive ones, but the Taylor T5Z is basically kind of like an Acousatonic or a Godin A6. And there might be some other guitars, but it's kind of one of those hybrid guitars. And so I also later would try a Godin A6, and I would definitely recommend that over the Taylor T5Z, if for no other reason than because the cost was much more affordable. At least it was back then. But, I got that Taylor T5Z, and I took it home. It was a huge purchase, and that was 10 years ago. And I didn't have this YouTube channel that back then. I played acoustic a lot on the weekends and in church and things like that. I hadn't really played electric much in years, other than like I said, in bars. My friend Bob and I would actually rock out, but I'd be on an acoustic. But I didn't have my Strats, and I had one good Telecaster, MIJ. 80s Telecaster, you can see on this channel. I talk about it in another video. But I look back on buying that T5z. I never ended up playing it because I was playing a lot at that time, and I would say, well, I'll just grab this, and I'd end up grabbing my Martin and going through with the same old setup I'd always had. And that Taylor T5z, I didn't end up using it that much. It was so pretty, and it just it never, because the main part of what I was looking for was an acoustic guitar. I mean, I always talk about how Bob and I and the Silver Duo would play rock and roll, which we did, but 80% of our music was acoustic. So we play Pure Prairie League and old like City of New Orleans type stuff. And so that Taylor T5z, there's no way it ever competed with my Martin. And after that, I ended up trading it in, and I bought a Taylor 314 CE, which was a better guitar for what I was doing. Although still, and it did have the Taylor Expression System 2 in it, which over the years I've come to appreciate because it's so simple. I think it's high quality and it's simple. But I ended up trading in that Taylor T5z. Then down the road, I was still on the quest. I'm never satisfied. I was one of these, kind of cork sniffing, I need the fainting couch questers, never quite satisfied with what I had. And I ended up having a Godin A6, which is another hybrid guitar, and I actually ended up using that pretty regularly. But, looking back on it, I wouldn't say that was all that great either for acoustic guitar, because you want a nice acoustic guitar. So looking back on that whole experience now, over the years, I've pretty much just come to either use my Martin with the sound hole pickup, or even easier, just use a Taylor with the Expression System 2. And, I don't play all that much rock, and so, it's not that big a deal. Perform, it's not like I'm up there trying to play, AC/DC or something every weekend. So, I'd get into Gibson SG if I was doing that. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often. But I look back on it now, and I just wanted to say this. There I was in a store, ready to spend $3,000 on a guitar. And I think, how dumb was I 10 years ago? I was in my 50s. I wasn't a kid. But how dumb was I to be standing there and pick a Taylor T5z over a Gibson ES-335? In what world, if you're just A-Bing something, in what world is a Taylor T5z a smarter guitar purchase than a Gibson ES-335? If you're going to spend $3,000 on a guitar, and I think that one I bought today is almost $4,000. Think about all the guitars you can buy for $4,000. And in particular this one, I think, because this one actually does. If I really wanted like something that I could play it like acoustically and also electrically, this one definitely. It's kind of that's what it was. It's electric Spanish. It was supposed to be kind of like an electric Spanish acoustic guitar. that you could play acoustically and play acoustic music on it. It was more suited, and it's a very versatile guitar. So I thought, it just hit me the other day, actually, the magnitude of how stupid that was. When I'm standing in a guitar store, Guitar Center, which, I always stick up for Guitar Center, and whatever you think of Guitar Center, they always have, some, nice Gibsons, some nice Fenders, some nice Martins, some nice Taylors. I mean, if you're in a Guitar Center, you definitely got some good guitars on the walls. So I'm standing in Guitar Center, probably 20 feet away from some really nice Gibson ES-335s, among other guitars. And I bought a Taylor T5z, which I never even ended up playing. And over the years I've thought about that, and so this is not trying to pick on Taylor. I actually like Taylor. I love my Taylor 8022E, but some of those really expensive Taylors, when they get to be $3,000 and $4,000 and $5,000 and $6,000, I always find myself thinking, I love a good Taylor. It's very professional, reliable gear. It's not a bunch of BS. But in what world would you want to buy a Taylor T5z that most people don't even know what it is over this? Even just from like a resale value, collector's value, or whatever, there's no comparison. That was such a foolish purchase, and it was expensive, And I do have some nice guitars, but I'm always a little sensitive. I don't want to run around and look like I'm just frivolous with money either. I'm a married man, so I think, in what world would I buy a Taylor T5z over a Gibson ES-335, among others, but in particular the Gibson ES-335, because there wasn't anything that I was looking for that I thought that Taylor T5z was going to do for me, which it actually didn't end up doing that much. But there wasn't anything that Taylor T5z did that this Gibson ES-335 wouldn't also do it. And you know what? Just as a practical kind of cultural matter, Taylor T5Z's, Taylor's a nice company, but you got one of these, you've got Alvin Lee, Steve Carlton, the Kid Charlemagne, Eric Clapton, Crossroads, all the great players that have played the Gibson ES3. You've got all that history of the Gibson ES-335. And I thought, there I was in a guitar store surrounded by great Gibsons. I also might have bought, a really nice D'Angelico semi-hollow, or even a hollow body. Heck, for $4,000, I almost could have bought like a Gibson ES-175. For $4,000, I could have bought, one of those really nice D'Angelicos, or an Epiphone Casino, or kind of an interesting guitar. So like I said, I'm not trying to cut down Taylor, because I think the thing that makes Taylors really good is they're like I said, they're not BS. They're always well made. They always play great. But like I said, when you get into a lot of money for a Taylor, after about $2,200 for a Taylor, I start to think, what? For that money, I could buy a Gibson. For that money, I could buy a Martin. For that money, I could buy a nice Fender. In particular, I was trying to buy this unicorn guitar that would play, acoustic. I could sit there and play, Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel or something, and then turn right around and, play, Hey Joe, or that'd be kind of the stuff Bob and I would do, just kind of easy stuff but stuff where you could really crank some leads, Hey Joe, or For What It's Worth, There's Something Happening Here. Bob and I used to take that to town. I mean, because Bob was a good player. He wasn't one of these guys that just kind of played the rhythm, kind of like a looper, sitting over there. He would like, embellish it and you like bring the dynamics. Now, so many people say, I don't want to just play the rhythm over and over again. No, well, no one wants you to, He would really be creative in his rhythm playing and kind of mix in little leads. And we would play some of those simple, but we would jam them. It would sound like a little orchestra in there, when we were playing. So I definitely liked having the electric. But on what planet do you have to be from? What planet do you have to be from to be standing there in a guitar store ready to spend $3,100 on a guitar, and you pick a Taylor T5z, which no one's ever even heard of, and they've got a bunch of cheaper versions of it, for that matter too. Some of the Taylor T5zs are, barely over $1,000, and I'm sure they're just fine. And that's probably a smarter purchase if you want one that bad. But you're standing there in a guitar store where you got, Gibson ES-335s, probably had a Gibson 175, which the ES-175, which they don't even make anymore. Gibson L5. I mean, for that kind of money, you can get some pretty nice guitars, for like $4,000. I'll say in today's money, that'd be about $4,000. If you're gonna dump down $4,000, you can get a pretty nice guitar for $4,000. I know you can spend a lot more than that, but I mean, you can get a nice guitar for $4,000. So, I don't know. I'm not trying to pick on Taylor. But over the years, I've thought, man, now, and especially more recently, that was the dumbest guitar purchase I've ever made, buying a Taylor T5z. When right there with I could have had like a nice Gibson ES-335, which is kind of the same thing, really. And by the way, the Taylor T5z and this, you're never gonna fool anybody that it's a Martin guitar. Who are you kidding? If acoustic guitar is that important to you, then play a Martin or a nice Taylor or a nice Gibson acoustic. I'm kind of starting to eye some of those Gibson acoustics. I'm not that familiar with them, but one of those Gibson Hummingbirds or something. Those are nice. Get yourself a good one. I always thought Gibsons, the ones I used to play years ago, were a little thuddy compared to a Martin. But I think they were good rhythm guitars. But for a picker, I always thought a Martin was a better guitar, but I have seen people like really flat picking things with nice Gibson acoustic guitars. But historically, I would say it was, if you were a picker, play a Martin. But anyway, if acoustic is really a priority for you, none of those electric guitars with a humbucking pickup in it's going to do the job for you, really. I mean. But I would play an acoustic gig on this with anything. I would play, little Cat Stevens ditty songs and whatever with this guitar. Absolutely. And and it wouldn't sound. I wouldn't be trying to fool anybody, and I think that's the mistake a lot of players make. They're trying to fool people. It's almost like fake, You're not trying to fool anybody that you're playing an acoustic. When I play this thing, it's got that electric sound. I notice it's how some guitars sound woody. This one sounds kind of metally, like a bell. Metal's not a bad metals make good music, like a nice bell, or the metal in a nice piano. Nice piano has wood. But also metal, there's a lot of metal in a piano, and that gives it there's a certain ring to that metal gives. And so I think this has a kind of a chimey belly sound that is kind of metal. It's electric, kind of is what it is. But there's nothing, I mean, if I really wanted that kind of versatility back then, I don't know, I would buy this. But for those gigs, I don't think really any of these would have been better than like my Martin or that Taylor, because we mostly played acoustic. But if I did really want to bring like a hybrid type guitar, what kind of idiot would I be to not to bring this one instead of a Taylor T5z? What does a Taylor T5z offer that this doesn't? I mean, a Taylor T5z has bridge pins. I don't know. In some ways, you can tell they try to make it a little more like an acoustic than you might think, but it's still basically an electric guitar, except I would say it's kind of compromised on electric guitar, and just even as a purchase matter, Taylor's not associated with electric guitars. So if you really want a nice electric guitar, and you're spending some money, I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying a Taylor, just as a financial thing, if nothing else. If you want an electric guitar, I'd recommend a Fender or Gibson or whatever, PRS. But dumbest purchase I ever made. And I kind of didn't want to make this video too much because I didn't want to make it sound like I was ripping on Taylor. I love Taylor. But I will, just as a consumer, I will say I would never spend like a lot of money on a Taylor again, like over, like, like a lot of money. Because you can buy a really nice Taylor, all solid wood, with that expression system too in it that plays great, tunes great, all that stuff, for $2,000, maybe 2,500. 314. If you want solid wood, I think 314 ZE. But I bought that American Dream Series 8022E, and that's all solid wood, and I got that for cheap. So look around, but just as a financial thing, that was the dumbest guitar purchase I ever made. And I ended up trading it in at Guitar Center, and I know I lost a lot of money. I don't even want to think about what I lost, but I'm sure I traded it in. I still got a lot of money when I traded it in. I mean, if you think about it, how much those things cost. So when you trade it in, I mean, you still can walk out with just like almost, with pretty good trade value towards a new guitar or whatever. But I know I lost money. I can't imagine that the resale value on those things is all that great. I would think. Like, it's not like selling like a guitar everybody knows about, like a Les Paul or a really nice Strat or a really nice, SG or something. Dumb move. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to tell that story in a way because it makes me sound like I'm foolish with my money, which I try not to be. But the other thing I'll just add to that is it always kind of made me a little mad at the guitar salesman because he was pushing that Taylor T5z. I don't know why. Did he get? Was that a better? He wanted me to buy that, and I was sitting there explaining and he didn't really know me, so I was explaining how I wanted like an acoustic type guitar that could play some electric. And so, man, he just went right to the most expensive thing on the shelf. And I remember after that, whenever I went in that Guitar Center, that guy whatever I was doing, man, he would drop whatever he was doing and head for me like a beeline before anyone else got to me. I know he wanted to sell me, and he thought I was some kind of sucker or something because I bought that really fancy guitar. Just didn't even really know what I was doing. I got smarter over the years, but in 2015, I was mostly just an acoustic player. I was working a lot at my real job, and I didn't, it was a foolish purchase, and I let a salesman talk me into it. And I just think about it now, and you know what? If there's not, I think if you can afford it, there's nothing wrong with having nice guitars. If you're a good guitar player, and you are smart with your money, there's nothing wrong with you owning nice guitars. But wow. I let that guy talk me into what I regard as the most foolish and expensive guitar purchase I ever made. And when I think about all the other guitars in that store I could have walked out with right there so easily, kind of a cautionary tale. Thanks. God bless.